Hey guys, welcome to today's video. If you're like me and you're tired of taking 20 minutes after a long trail ride to air your tires back up with your current compressor setup, then keep watching this video. I have this problem every time my wife gets tired after the trip, and she gets upset that it takes so long, especially now that we take our little baby wheeling as well, and he gets fussy when I'm just airing up the tires and the car is not moving. To solve this issue, I got me an ARB Twin compressor. Any of you who have been wheeling or off-roading or overlanding for any amount of time know that this is the gold standard in onboard air setups. It comes with conveniently mountable switches and can power items such as air lockers if you ever get those, air tools, air blowguns, things like that. You'll need terminal connectors and some shrink wrap for this install, but everything else is in the kit. I'm also going to be moving my aux beam switch panel control box to the fuse box cover. To start, let me introduce you to my Rego Fabrication ARB Twin compressor mount. This thing is awesome. I used it previously to install the control box, but now I'm actually going to use it for what it was intended for, and that is to mount the ARB Twin compressor. At first, I tried to rotate the control box 180 degrees and mount it straight on the fuse panel cover. However, I realized that my wiring was insufficient, so what my brother-in-law helped me do is take off the Rego Fab mount and clean up the wiring. This took a long time, as you could see. However, I'm so glad we did it. I undid each wire from the control box, cut away any length that I no longer needed, fed that through the grommet into the interior of the vehicle, and got rid of the wire since I'm not using those switches anymore anyway. Then we moved the control box input ports up to the front of the fuse panel to make it easier to do installs in the future, and also because I think the compressor would have blocked access to the rear of the control box if we mounted it 180 degrees anyway. So this setup ended up working way better. To start the assembly, take out these little plugs on the intake ports and screw in these intake air filters. That's what these things are. If you're wondering, they're intake air filters. And don't worry about clocking it to have that ARB logo sitting straight up. That outer ring is actually turning independent of the threaded bit. So when you're done screwing that in, you don't have to over torque it or anything to get it to sit right. Now we're gonna put the bracket and the compressor back together. Now I highly recommend not doing it the way I did it. We first secured the Rego Fabrication bracket and then we put the compressor on, which forced me to use every bit of length I had in my arms to screw in the unit, and it was super uncomfortable and time consuming. So again, install the compressor on the Rego Fabrication mount before putting it into its final resting place. And check it out, guys. This is what the final assembly looks like. I'm super happy that I cleaned up all the other wiring so that I can make the wiring for this unit nice and simple and have it work well into the long term. Now let's get started on wiring the compressor to the battery. The kit comes with a large harness plug that leads to this end with two 40 amp maxi fuses on the positive side and the ground cable which goes on the negative side of the battery, of course. These wires are, I believe, 6 gauge. Now you can see me routing the harness through the side of the vehicle near the fender, and you can see that it plugs in to that connector that comes out of the back of the compressor unit. So now what I'm going to do, of course, is disconnect the negative cable of the battery. This will totally kill all power to the vehicle, so you don't have to worry about shorting anything or getting shocked, anything like that. And I recommend doing that before doing any electrical work on your vehicle. Now I'm just getting an idea of the length of wire that I want for each respective cable and cutting it to length and stripping the wires. I forgot my super easy wire stripper, so I had to make do with whatever was at my in-laws' house. But hey, if there's a will, there's a way. So anyways, here I am putting the shrink wrap in first. Now this doesn't end up working on the negative side, as you'll see in a couple seconds. The terminal end ended up being too wide for that particular shrink wrap, so I had to use a bigger one. Instead of 6 gauge terminal ends, I got 4 gauge ones just because I wasn't sure if those two 6 gauge ones would combine to be larger on the positive side. And that's okay. For the negative side, I just bent the wire over like this to take up more space in the terminal, and and then put the terminal end over that wire and crimp down the terminal onto the wire with anything I could find, including these wire strippers that did not have a 4-gauge input, so I used some pliers to get the job done. Like I said before, the previous shrink wrap didn't work, so I fed this bigger one over the terminal. And then you can see here that it shrinks right onto the assembly without any effort at all. This was super satisfying, and incidentally, my first time trying shrink wrap. Let's just say I'm a big fan. On the negative side, you may have missed that there's actually 2 wires there as well, but one of them is very small. So basically, it's rinse and repeat on the positive and negative side. You twist each individual wire together and then twist both wires together at the end to get that final assembly there. Then get your oversized shrink wrap this time instead of the perfectly fitting shrink wrap like I did on the negative side. Slide that over before putting the terminal on. Put the terminal on the exposed part of the wires and crimp them down for the final connection point for the electricity to flow through. Then, once you're done with that, go ahead and slide the shrink wrap up and over the part of the terminal that won't be connected to your battery and get some heat source to shrink it up and complete the final assembly. Now I'm just finishing up the wire routing around the battery to make sure that everything fits securely, and using some zip ties here and there just to make sure that there's no loose wiring in the engine bay and that all of them are not under too much stress or tension. Then I'm undoing the bolt that secures the negative side of the battery to the chassis for the ground. And then I'm putting the negative terminal for the compressor in that sandwich. You can see there are 3 terminals there. That's for the battery negative, the winch, and now the air compressor. Now you're going to do the same thing on the positive side, except for this one connects directly to the terminal on the positive side of the battery. Now I'm just placing a zip tie to make sure that everything stays in place. Now let's take a look at the switch harness system. This is a separate and smaller harness, and it goes directly to switches 1 and 2 and the isolating switch. Switches 1 and 2 are meant for air lockers. The isolating switch is meant for the air compressor in case you're not installing this into a switch panel control box like I am. If you have a switch panel system, all you need is this harness. This one is just power and ground from the battery, and you'll see that it's not red and black, but purple and black, which confused me at first, but it's easy when you just imagine that the purple cable is power and the black one is ground. As such, you won't be needing the green and yellow cable for this install that I'm doing into the switch panel. So now I'm routing that harness through the same side I did for the battery harness and bundling up the excess so that I can make sure everything stays nice and clean. Then I am cutting some of the sheathing back so that I have those power and ground cables free, and that will enable me to make a clean cut on the power and ground cable. Then all I have to do is strip the wires back a little bit, like I've shown you on the switch panel install video, twist up the wires, and insert them into the proper positive and negative terminals. All you have to do is loosen the screw to bring the lugs down, put the wire in, and tighten the screw back up to bring the lug back up and squeeze the wire in between there. And that's what makes your electrical connection here. And in my experience, it's been super reliable. Now I'm just reconnecting the negative battery terminal and plugging in the other ends of the harness into those respective plugs. This is for the battery harness that gives it power, and this is for the switch harness that's going to power your switches. At this point, everything is connected up and it should work, so let's give it a quick test. There you go. All right. It works perfect with the switch panel. Here is the final assembly, everybody. I am super happy with how this turned out and that I was able to clean up the wiring underneath that Rego fabrication mount. Now let's talk about the new air hose setup that I was talking about earlier. This is the MORRFLATE Multi-Tire Inflation and Deflation kit. It plugs into your compressor like this and has hoses leading out to fittings that attach to all 4 tires. Now let's see just how much time this is going to save us. My current setup involves just a normal air down tool where you screw it onto the valve stem and remove the valve core, then air down the tire one at a time. I've gotten pretty good at this, so it doesn't take me that long. I was able to air down to 25 psi in around 6 minutes. Now let's see how long it takes me to air up with my current compressor setup. As you'll notice, this takes a significantly longer amount of time to air up than air down. I'm going from one tire to another with a small compressor that connects to the battery. It takes almost a full 5 minutes per tire for me to do it this way, which contributes to pretty extreme frustration when you've already spent the entire day on the trails and you just want to go home at this point. Also, the gauge on this thing is totally unreliable and I have to double check the pressures every time. Now let's check the air down and air up times with the MORRFLATE Tire Inflation and Deflation kit. Keep in mind that it does take some getting used to, and this is my very first time using the system, so I do waste a bit of time turning the nozzle on and off to check the pressure because I'm not sure how fast air is coming out. But here you see me packing it all up, and that takes another total of about 6 minutes, but I think I can bring this down significantly with some practice. Now let's see if the combination of the ARB Twin air compressor and the MORRFLATE Multi-Tire Inflation kit solves the problem I was really looking to solve, which is air up times. I don't think it'll be too hard for the system to beat 20 minutes, so I really just wanted to see how much it beat it by. Can it save me 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes? And what I discovered was very encouraging. I saved 11 minutes with this setup, including double checking the pressures to make sure that the MORRFLATE gauge was reading correctly and packing everything up. So guys, let me know what you think of my new onboard air setup and if you've ever considered making a change like this to your kit. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really just encourages me to keep making content for you guys. Thanks so much for watching today's video. We'll see you in the next one.